The blood on the sand told a story no one wanted to read. Captain Garrett Vance knelt beside the shattered radio, his jaw tight as he scanned the empty desert stretching toward the Mexican border. The Arizona sun beat down mercilessly, turning the Sonoran landscape into a furnace of heat and regret. 36 hours ago, Commander Jacob Brennan had driven into this wasteland on what should have been a routine reconnaissance mission. Now all that remained was a dark stain soaking into the sand, scattered equipment, and the kind of silence that follows violence. Before we continue, drop a comment and let us know what state you're watching from. Maybe you've witnessed courage like this where you're from. 36 hours earlier. The Black Hawk touched down at Forward Operating Base Sentinel in a storm of dust and desert heat. Chief Warrant Officer Thea Brandt stepped onto the packed earth with a single duffel bag over her shoulder, squinting against the afternoon sun as the rotor wash whipped her dark hair across her face. She was 26 years old, stood 5'7", and carried herself with the kind of quiet stillness that most people mistook for shyness. They were wrong. FOB Sentinel sprawled across the border region like a wound. Prefabricated housing units and sandbag positions surrounded by razor wire that glinted in the harsh light. The base sat 12 miles north of the Mexican border, positioned to intercept cartel weapons trafficking and provide support for border patrol operations that sometimes went sideways. It was the kind of place career officers avoided and young operators used as a stepping stone. A young Marine corporal approached her with a clipboard, his uniform already dark with sweat despite the early hour. He couldn't have been more than 19. "You must be the logistics analyst," he said, checking her name against his manifest. His eyes didn't quite meet hers. "Captain Vance said to send you straight to operations for check-in." Thea nodded, her pale gray eyes taking in the layout of the base with a practiced sweep that lingered on sight lines, cover positions, and a gap in the perimeter wire near the motor pool that nobody seemed to have noticed. She said nothing about it. She simply shouldered her bag and followed the corporal toward the operations center, her boots crunching on gravel that radiated heat like a griddle. The operations center hummed with activity. A dozen personnel monitoring screens and communications equipment that linked this remote outpost to commands spanning 3 continents. Captain Garrett Vance stood near the tactical display, his broad frame blocking the screen as he argued with a communications specialist about signal interference. He was 35, ambitious, and convinced that modern technology had made old-school tactics obsolete. He turned when Thea approached, and his expression shifted from irritation to something colder. "The logistics analyst," he said, managing to make the title sound like an insult. "Command said you were coming." He crossed his arms. What exactly is a logistics analyst supposed to do at a forward operating base in the middle of hostile territory? Thea met his gaze without flinching. Her voice was quiet but clear. "Support your operations, Captain, whatever you need." Vance snorted and turned back to the tactical display. "What I need is another shooter, not another desk jockey taking up rack space." He didn't look at her again. "Stay out of the way and try not to get anyone killed by accident." A few of the nearby SEALs exchanged glances. Some smirked at the dismissal. Others simply returned to their work, already forgetting she existed. The weight was familiar. She'd carried it long enough to make it part of her. The billeting sergeant assigned her a bunk in the support personnel quarters, a plywood box barely large enough for a cot and a footlocker. As she stowed her gear, she heard a commotion outside and stepped into the corridor to find a young specialist sitting against the wall, his face pale and his hand pressed against his ribs. "What happened?" Thea asked, crouching beside him. The specialist winced. "Took a fall helping unload supplies. Think I cracked something." He tried to breathe deeply and gasped. "Doc's busy with pre-mission physicals for the operators." Thea examined him with gentle, practiced hands, feeling along his ribcage with a touch that spoke of experience she wasn't supposed to have. Her fingers found the fracture points with clinical precision. "2 cracked ribs," she said quietly. "You need to get these wrapped before they shift." She helped him to his feet and walked him to the medical station, waiting until the corpsman could see him despite the line of impatient SEALs who clearly considered their pre-mission checks more important than one injured support specialist. A few of them shot her annoyed looks. She ignored them, staying until the specialist was properly treated. Nobody thanked her. She didn't expect them to. That evening, she saw Commander Jacob Brennan for the first time. He entered the mess hall like he belonged there, which he did. A 15-year veteran with salt and pepper at his temples and the easy confidence of a man who had earned the respect of everyone under his command. He was 48 years old, carried himself like someone who had nothing left to prove, and possessed the rare gift of treating people like human beings, regardless of their rank. When his eyes found Thea sitting alone at a corner table, he crossed the room and sat down across from her without asking permission. "You're the new logistics analyst," he said. It wasn't a question. "Brant, right?" "Yes, sir." Brennan studied her for a moment, and something flickered in his expression, a curiosity that the others hadn't shown. "I read your transfer file. Interesting background for a logistics position." He paused. "Marine Scout Sniper qualification, 2 tours in Afghanistan, language skills, combat medical training." Another pause. "That's a lot of capability for someone pushing supply requisitions." Thea kept her face neutral. "I go where I'm needed, Commander." Brennan nodded slowly, then smiled, a genuine expression that softened the hard lines of his face. "Well, Chief Warrant Officer Brant, I hope you find what you're looking for here. This team is the best I've ever worked with, even if they can be slow to warm up to outsiders." He stood and paused. "If you need anything, my door is open. We may be in the middle of nowhere, but that doesn't mean we forget basic decency." After he left, Thea sat alone with her thoughts, the noise of the mess hall fading to background static. She hadn't expected kindness here. It complicated things. She reached into her pocket and touched the cold metal of her brother's dog tags. Corporal Elias Brandt, killed in action 3 years ago in an operation that officially never happened. She had made him a promise over his grave. She had sworn that she would never let another good person die in the shadows, while she stood by, doing nothing. Commander Brennan was a good person. She had known it the moment he sat down across from her and treated her like a human being instead of an inconvenience. Later that night, she slipped from her quarters and walked the perimeter of the base, memorizing patrol patterns and testing the shadows. The desert night was surprisingly cold, 60 degrees colder than the daytime high, and the stars burned with an intensity that city dwellers never experienced. When she reached the gap in the wire near the motor pool, she stopped and studied it for a long moment. A vulnerability that could get people killed. She could report it, but that would raise questions about why a logistics analyst was walking the perimeter at midnight. Instead, she filed it away in her memory and returned to her bunk. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. Tonight, she needed to rest. But sleep didn't come easily. She lay in the darkness, listening to the distant sounds of the base settling into its night routine, and thought about Elias. 3 years gone, but the wound was still fresh. He had been 23 when the IED took him, young enough to still believe that courage and training could overcome any obstacle. He had walked into an ambush in Somalia, trusting his team and his mission. The men who killed him had never been identified. The operation had never officially existed. His sacrifice had been buried in classified files that would remain sealed for decades. Thea had joined the Ghost Unit to honor his memory. She had become something more than human, a weapon forged in darkness, because that was the only way she knew to ensure his death meant something. At dawn, Commander Brennan departed on his reconnaissance mission with a 4-man element. Thea watched the vehicles disappear into the desert from the operations center doorway, a strange unease settling in her chest. Captain Vance stood nearby, already dismissing her presence with his turned back. Something was wrong. She could feel it the way she had learned to feel danger in places that didn't exist on any map. The route Brennan was taking funneled through terrain that offered perfect ambush geometry. The timing was wrong. Early morning when shadows still provided concealment for enemy positions. The communications plan relied too heavily on line-of-sight radio, which wouldn't work in the broken terrain northeast of the base. But she was just a logistics analyst, and logistics analysts didn't have instincts worth trusting. The vehicles vanished over the horizon, and Thea turned away, unable to shake the feeling that she had just watched good men drive toward their death. The first sign that something had gone wrong came at 700 hours the next morning, when Brennan's element missed their scheduled communication check. Thea was in the operations center, ostensibly reviewing supply manifests, a cover that allowed her to monitor the tactical channels without drawing attention. She watched Captain Vance's expression shift from annoyance to concern as the minutes stretched past the check-in window. "Try them again," Vance ordered the communications specialist. "Viper 1, this is Falcon Base, requesting status check." The specialist repeated the call 3 times. Each attempt met with empty static. Vance grabbed the handset himself. "Brennan, this is Vance. Come back." Nothing. He slammed the handset down and turned to the tactical display, his mind already racing through possibilities. Get the QRF spun up. I want a search team ready in 15 minutes. Thea remained at her station, her fingers still moving across the keyboard, even as every instinct screamed at her to act. She wasn't supposed to be here for this. She was supposed to be invisible, a ghost in logistics clothing, waiting for a mission that had nothing to do with these men. But Brennan had been kind to her, and kindness was rare enough that she couldn't simply watch it disappear into the desert. The Quick Reaction Force launched within the hour, a six-man team led by Petty Officer First Class Nolan Webb, a young operator with sharp eyes and a reputation for keeping his head when others lost theirs. Thea tracked their progress on the tactical display, watching the blue icons move across the digital terrain toward Brennan's last known position. When they found the ambush site, Webb's voice came through flat and controlled. Falcon Base, we have signs of engagement. Multiple blood trails, shell casings, vehicle tracks heading northeast. Commander's radio is destroyed. No bodies. Vance leaned over the communications console. Any sign of survivors? Negative, but the blood volume suggests wounded, not killed. Someone was taken alive. The operations center went silent. Thea felt the weight of it pressing down on everyone, the unspoken reality that their commander was now in enemy hands. She had seen this before, in other places with other names, and she knew what came next. The desperate planning, the impossible choices, the clock that started ticking the moment a man became a prisoner. Vance took command with the grim efficiency of a man who had trained for this moment while hoping it would never come. He ordered the intelligence section to pull every asset they had, demanded satellite coverage and drone support, and began planning a rescue operation with the ferocity of someone determined to bring his commander home. Thea was not invited to the planning sessions. She stood outside the briefing room door, listening to fragments of conversation that drifted through the thin walls. When Intelligence Officer Paige Merrick approached her, she didn't react. Paige was 32, blonde, efficient, and one of the few people on base who seemed to actually see Thea rather than looking through her. "You shouldn't be here," Paige said quietly. Her intelligence credentials gave her access to truths that others couldn't see. "Neither should you," Thea replied without turning. Paige moved to stand beside her, both women facing the closed door. "I know why you're really here, and I know this mission has nothing to do with your assignment." Thea finally looked at her, those storm cloud eyes revealing nothing. "He was decent to me." Paige nodded slowly. "The intelligence suggests a 72-hour window. After that, they'll either move him or execute him for propaganda value." "Then we have 72 hours. "We have nothing," Paige said. "Vance will never let you near this operation. As far as he knows, you're a liability he can't afford." Thea said nothing, but something shifted in her expression. A hardness that Paige recognized from classified files she was never supposed to have read. Later that night, Thea sat alone in her quarters, the door secured, and the single lamp casting harsh shadows across the plywood walls. She reached into her footlocker and withdrew a photograph, its edges worn soft from years of handling. The young man in the picture wore marine dress blues, his smile bright and unguarded, his eyes the same storm cloud shade as her own. Corporal Elias Brandt, her younger brother, dead at 23 in an operation that officially never happened, killed by enemies who were never identified, buried with honors that could never be spoken aloud. She had made him a promise over his grave. She had sworn that she would never let another good person die in the shadows while she stood by doing nothing. Commander Brennan was a good person. She had known it the moment he sat down across from her in the mess hall and treated her like a human being instead of an inconvenience. She pressed the photograph to her chest and closed her eyes. "I'll bring him back," she whispered. "I promise." A soft knock at her door made her slip the photograph away before opening it. Petty Officer Webb stood in the corridor, his young face troubled. He was 24, muscular, competent, and possessed the rare quality of actually thinking before he spoke. "I saw you watching the briefing," he said quietly. "You understand more than you let on." Thea studied him for a long moment. "What do you want, Petty Officer?" Webb hesitated. "Vance's plan has gaps. He's moving too fast, not accounting for the enemy sniper positions we identified during the search. I tried to bring it up, but he shut me down." "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you notice things." Webb met her eyes. I watched you help that specialist yesterday when everyone else walked past, and I saw how you looked at the tactical display today. You weren't just watching, you were analyzing. Fia felt something loosen in her chest, the smallest crack in the armor she had built around herself. You're taking a risk talking to me. Maybe. Webb held her gaze. But I'd rather take a risk than watch my commander die because no one had the courage to speak up. He turned and walked away, leaving Thea alone with the knowledge that she had found an ally in a place where she had expected only hostility. She returned to her bunk and began to plan. Vance's operation would fail. She could see it clearly now. The gaps Webb had mentioned, and others that the young operator hadn't yet learned to recognize. The enemy knew they were coming. They would be waiting. 72 hours. Less now. She couldn't stop Vance from launching his flawed rescue, but she could be ready when it failed, and she would be ready. Vance launched the rescue operation at 0300, convinced that darkness would provide the cover his team needed. Thea watched from the operations center as 6 SEALs loaded into 2 vehicles and disappeared into the night, their infrared signatures fading from the thermal cameras mounted on the perimeter towers. She had tried one more time to voice her concerns. 3 hours earlier, she had approached Vance outside the armory and spoken with careful precision about the enemy sniper positions that Webb had identified, about the lack of adequate counter-sniper support, about the terrain that would funnel his team into a kill zone. Vance had looked at her like she was speaking a foreign language. "Stick to your supply manifests," he had said, his voice dripping with contempt. "Let the operators handle the operating." Now she stood before the tactical display, watching blue icons move toward a trap that she could see as clearly as if she had drawn it herself. Paige Merrick stood beside her, both women silent as the minutes crawled past. The first shots came at 0347. "Contact! Contact!" Webb's voice crackled through the speakers, tight with controlled urgency. "Multiple shooters, elevated positions. They were waiting for us." The operations center erupted into controlled chaos. Communications specialists relayed coordinates while intelligence officers scrambled to redirect drone assets. Thea remained motionless, her eyes fixed on the display as the blue icons scattered and took cover. Vance's voice cut through the noise. "Viper team, status report." "2 wounded," Webb responded. His breathing was labored. "Kowalski took one in the leg, Martinez in the shoulder. We're pinned down. Enemy snipers have the high ground on 3 sides. We can't advance." Thea watched the tactical display, her mind mapping the terrain from memory. The enemy had chosen their position perfectly. Any approach to the compound would funnel through a narrow valley with elevated ridgelines on either side. Classic ambush geometry. The kind of trap that killed men who rushed in without proper reconnaissance. "Can you withdraw?" Vance demanded. A burst of static, then Webb again. "Negative. They have our exit covered. Every time we move, they adjust. These aren't insurgents, Captain. These are trained snipers." The weight of that statement hung in the air. Trained snipers meant professional opposition, possibly mercenaries or contractors from a hostile nation. It meant that Brennan's capture wasn't random violence, but a deliberate operation. It meant the enemy had known they were coming. Thea turned to Paige. "They have intelligence on us. Someone talked. Or they intercepted our communications." Paige's face was grim. "I'll start a security review, but that doesn't help Viper Team right now." On the display, the blue icons remained pinned, surrounded by red markers indicating enemy positions. Every few minutes, another burst of fire would send the SEALs scrambling for new cover. They were trapped, bleeding, and running out of options. Vance made the call at 0430. "Viper Team, fall back. Use smoke and suppressive fire. Get your wounded out." "What about the commander?" someone asked. Vance's voice was hollow. "We'll regroup and try again, but I'm not losing more men tonight." The withdrawal was ugly. Thea listened to the radio chatter as the SEALs fought their way out of the kill zone, dragging their wounded through terrain that offered no mercy. By the time they reached the extraction point, 3 more men had taken shrapnel from enemy grenades. They returned to base at 0600, bloody and defeated. Thea watched from the operations center doorway as the wounded were rushed to medical, as the uninjured operator stood in silence with the hollow look of men who had failed. Vance was the last to exit the vehicle. His uniform was torn and stained. His face was a mask of barely contained fury. When he saw Thea watching, something in him snapped. "This is your fault," he snarled, crossing the distance between them with dangerous speed. "Intelligence was supposed to give us accurate enemy positions. Your people fed us bad information." Thea held her ground. I tried to warn you about the sniper positions. You chose not to listen. For a moment, she thought he might strike her. His hands clenched into fists. His body trembled with rage and shame and the unbearable weight of failure. But Webb stepped between them, his young face pale but determined. She did try to warn you, Captain, he said. I was there. She identified the exact threat that hit us. Vance stared at Webb like he had never seen him before. Then he turned and walked away without another word, disappearing into the operations center, where he would have to report his failure to command. Paige appeared at Thea's side. New intelligence just came in. The enemy is accelerating their timeline. Commander Brennan will be executed in 48 hours. They're filming it for propaganda. Thea absorbed this information without visible reaction, but inside, something cold and precise clicked into place. 48 hours. Vance's team was combat ineffective, 5 wounded and the rest shaken. Command would need at least 72 hours to position another rescue force. There was only one option left. She turned to Paige. I need access to the armory, quietly. Paige studied her for a long moment. Whatever you're planning, it's suicide. Maybe. Her eyes held no fear, only cold certainty. But I made a promise. She walked away before Paige could respond, her mind already shifting into operational mode. She would need to move fast, gather equipment, slip out of the base before anyone noticed she was gone. 48 hours. She had worked with less. But first, she needed to talk to someone. Someone who understood what she was planning. Someone who had been watching her since the moment she arrived. Master Gunnery Sergeant Sterling Cade was waiting for her outside the armory. He was 55 years old, built like a barrel, with gray hair cropped close to his skull and eyes that had seen too much and forgotten nothing. He had served in the Gulf War, in Somalia, in a dozen other conflicts that had shaped the modern military. He was 3 months from retirement, ready to leave the fight to younger men. But he was also a man who recognized a warrior when he saw one. Chief Warrant Officer Brandt, he said quietly. His voice was gravel and smoke. Or should I call you Phantom? Thea went very still. I don't know what you're talking about, Master Gunny. Cade smiled, a thin expression without humor. Yes, you do. I've trained operators like you. I know the signs. The way you move. The way you see things others miss. The way you carry yourself like you're always 1 second away from killing everyone in the room. He pulled out a folded document from his jacket. I also have friends in interesting places. Friends who told me about a certain chief warrant officer who earned a rather unique call sign during 6 deployments in locations that officially don't exist. Thea said nothing. There was nothing to say. 127 confirmed kills, Cade continued. 12 successful extractions of high-value prisoners, assigned to Joint Special Operations Command Ghost Unit, classified above top secret. He paused and his expression softened slightly. When I saw the name Brandt on the manifest, I made a call. An old friend at JSOC confirmed what I suspected. Elias's little sister had followed him into the shadows. Different path, same promise. He paused again. You're here on a mission that has nothing to do with logistics, and Commander Brennan's capture just became very personal to you. He showed me kindness, Thea said quietly. That's rare. Cade nodded. It is. And now you're planning to go after him alone. I work better alone. I know you do. Cade folded the document and put it away. But you're going to accept my help anyway. Not because you need it, but because your odds improve from 60% to 80% with someone watching your back. Why would you help me? Cade's expression softened. Because 30 years ago I knew your brother, Corporal Elias Brandt, Somalia, 2016. He saved my life during an extraction operation. Died doing it. He met her eyes. I never got to repay that debt. Let me do it now. Thea felt something crack inside her. The armor she had built, the distance she had maintained. He never told me he knew you. Heroes rarely talk about the things that matter most. Cade extended his hand. So here's the deal. You're the primary. I'm support. You make the calls. I watch your 6. We bring Commander Brennan home, or we don't come home at all. Thea took his hand. His grip was iron. We leave tonight, she said. I know. 48 hours. The clock was ticking. And somewhere in the desert, Commander Jacob Brennan was running out of time. The desert swallowed them whole. Thea moved through the darkness like a shadow given form, her silhouette indistinguishable from the rocks and scrub that dotted the barren landscape. Behind her, 50 meters back, Master Gunnery Sergeant Sterling Cade followed with the steady patience of a man who had learned long ago that speed was the enemy of survival. 2,200 hours. The night air had dropped to 50 degrees, a shocking contrast to the 110-degree inferno of the day. Thea's breath came in controlled measures, her body moving with the efficiency of a machine designed for a single purpose. She carried a custom Mk-22 sniper rifle across her back, a suppressed Glock 19 at her hip, and 8 magazines distributed across her vest. No night vision. The technology could fail, and failures got people killed. Instead, she navigated by starlight and the mental map she had constructed from satellite imagery that officially didn't exist. The gap in the perimeter fence had served its purpose. Paige Merrick had ensured the cameras looked elsewhere for exactly 7 minutes. It was all the time they needed. Now they were ghosts in the desert, moving toward a compound 12 kilometers northeast where Commander Jacob Brennan was being held by men who had already proven they could kill American operators with impunity. Thea paused at a rise and dropped to one knee, her eyes scanning the terrain ahead. The Sonoran Desert was a study in contradictions, beautiful and deadly, ancient and indifferent. Saguaro cacti stood like sentinels against the star-filled sky, their arms raised in eternal surrender. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called out, and another answered. Cade materialized beside her, moving with a silence that belied his age and bulk. "Contact," he whispered. 200 meters, 10 o'clock, two-man patrol. Thea had already seen them. She watched through her rifle scope as 2 figures moved along a ridgeline, their thermal signatures bright against the cool desert night. They were alert but not alarmed, conducting routine security rather than active search. "They don't know we're coming," she said. "Not yet." Thea calculated distances, angles, escape routes. The patrol was moving perpendicular to their approach vector, would pass within 50 meters of their position in approximately 3 minutes. She could bypass them by moving south, adding 30 minutes to their timeline. Or she could eliminate them and continue on course. 30 minutes might be the difference between finding Brennan alive or finding his body. "I'm going," she said. Cade didn't argue. He simply adjusted his position to provide overwatch, his rifle trained on the approaching patrol. This was Thea's operation. He was support. Those were the rules they had agreed upon. Thea moved like water, flowing from shadow to shadow, using the terrain's natural folds to mask her approach. She had learned this craft from Master Chief Isaiah Grant during 2 years of intensive training that had stripped away everything civilian and rebuilt her into something else, something harder, something necessary. The first man died without sound. Thea's knife found the gap between his helmet and body armor with surgical precision, the blade severing the carotid artery before he could process what was happening. She lowered his body into a shallow depression, already moving toward the second man. He turned at the subtle noise, the whisper of fabric, the soft exhale of death, and his eyes widened in the fraction of a second before Thea's hand closed over his mouth and the knife completed its work. She held him as the light left his eyes, feeling the weight of another life ended, another soul sent into whatever darkness waited beyond. She felt nothing. That was the price of becoming a weapon. Cade appeared beside her, helped her drag both bodies deeper into the shadows, where they wouldn't be found until dawn. They worked in silence, 2 professionals executing a grim task with the efficiency of long practice. "Clear," Cade said. They moved on. The miles passed beneath their boots with relentless monotony. Thea's mind settled into the operational state she had cultivated over 6 deployments, a place of absolute focus where emotion became background noise and instinct became gospel. She thought about Elias, as she always did on missions, thought about the promise she had made, thought about Commander Brennan's kindness in a place where kindness was currency more valuable than gold. At 01:30, they reached their observation point. The compound spread before them like a cancer on the desert floor, illuminated by harsh floodlights that turned the surrounding area into a kill zone. Thea settled into a prone position behind a cluster of rocks 950 meters from the main structure, pulling out her spotting scope and beginning the methodical process of cataloging every detail. The compound was larger than intelligence had suggested. A central 2-story building, probably an old ranch house or border station, surrounded by smaller structures that looked like storage sheds or barracks. Everything was enclosed by a perimeter wall constructed from stacked sandbags and concrete barriers. Professional work. Military work. Count, Cade whispered beside her. 25 guards visible, Thea said, her voice flat and clinical. 4 elevated sniper positions. North Tower, East Ridge, West Outcropping, South Roof. Rotating patrols in 15-minute intervals. 3 guard posts at the perimeter. 2 rovers with no fixed pattern. Weapons? Mix of AK pattern rifles and Western platforms. I see at least 2 M4s, probably taken from Vance's team. She adjusted her scope. Professional discipline, good spacing, interlocking fields of fire. Whoever set this up knows what they're doing. Cade studied the compound through his own optics. That's Spetsnaz doctrine, Russian Special Operations playbook. I saw setups like this in Georgia back in '08. Thea's scope swept across the second floor of the main building and her breath caught. There, visible through a window, was Commander Brennan. He was tied to a chair, his face swollen and discolored even from this distance, his head slumped forward in exhaustion or unconsciousness. But he was alive, still alive. Target acquired, she said. Second floor, northwest window. Commander is secured but breathing. Guards inside? Can't see interior clearly. Assume at least 6 on rotation, probably more. She continued her survey, counting, measuring, planning. This is a hard target, Master Gunny. Very hard. But not impossible. Nothing's impossible. Thea's voice carried the weight of 6 deployments and 127 confirmed kills. Just expensive. She spent the next 2 hours mapping every detail, committing patrol patterns to memory, identifying the subtle tells that separated professional soldiers from amateurs. These men were good. Very good. They moved with confidence born from training and combat experience. They communicated with hand signals and maintained noise discipline. They watched their sectors with the focus of men who understood that attention to detail was the difference between living and dying. But they had one fatal flaw. They were expecting a rescue attempt. They were prepared for vehicles and drones and the overwhelming force that American military operations typically brought to bear. They were not prepared for a single sniper approaching through terrain they considered impassable. At 0300, Thea finally spotted him. A man emerged from the main building and stood in the courtyard, lit by the harsh floodlights. He was tall, broad-shouldered, moved with the easy confidence of command. Even from 950 meters away, Thea could see the scar that ran down the left side of his face from temple to jaw, a distinctive mark that made identification certain. Viktor Konstantin, former Spetsnaz, former Russian military intelligence, current mercenary working for the highest bidder. She had put that scar on his face 2 years ago in Syria, during an operation to extract a CIA asset from a compound outside Aleppo. She had taken the shot at 1,300 meters through a sandstorm, aiming for his heart but hitting high as he turned. He had survived, vanished into the chaos of the Syrian civil war. And now he was here, in Arizona, holding an American commander prisoner. Master Gunny, she said quietly. Central courtyard, man in black tactical gear. Do you see him? Cade adjusted his scope. I see him. Who is he? Viktor Konstantin, former Russian Special Operations. We have history. Thea's voice remained flat, but something cold had entered her eyes. This isn't random, Master Gunny. He took Commander Brennan to draw someone out. He took him to draw out the ghost unit. He took him to draw out you. Yes. Cade lowered his scope and looked at her. Does that change the plan? No. Thea's jaw set. It just means he's expecting me, which means I need to be better than he expects. As they watched, Viktor turned and surveyed the compound with the eye of a man inspecting his handiwork. He spoke to someone Thea couldn't see, gestured toward the perimeter, then disappeared back into the building. 4 sniper positions, Thea said, returning to her tactical analysis. All 4 need to be eliminated before I can approach. They have overlapping fields of fire covering every approach vector. Can you make those shots? Yes. It wasn't arrogance. It was statement of fact. Thea had made harder shots in worse conditions. The longest confirmed kill in her record was 1,420 meters, a Taliban commander in the mountains of Afghanistan, through wind that would have made most snipers pack up and go home. Range to first target, Cade said. Thea adjusted her scope to the north tower. 870 meters. Sniper is scanning south. He's expecting approach from the direction of the base. Ranged a second. East Ridge, 1,040 meters. Elevated position, good cover, professional discipline. He hasn't moved in 15 minutes except to scan his sector. Ranged to third. West outcropping, 785 meters. Younger, less experienced. He's shifting position every few minutes, nervous. Range to fourth. South roof, 920 meters. Best of the four. He's watching the approaches the others miss. Thea paused, calculating. I take them in sequence. North, east, west, south. One shot each. No time for correction. The moment the first one drops, they'll know someone's out here. Time between shots? 30 seconds per position. I relocate between each shot. If they're well trained, they'll have counter snipers in reserve. She looked at Cade. I'll need you to mark my muzzle flash. Call out if they fix my position. Cade nodded. I've got you. They spent the next hour preparing. Thea marked her firing positions, 4 different locations that would give her clear shots at each target while making it difficult for counter snipers to triangulate her location. She calculated wind speed using the drift of dust and heat shimmer, estimated temperature effects on bullet trajectory, adjusted for the slight elevation differences between each firing position. No ballistic computer, no rangefinder, just mathematics, experience, and the absolute certainty that comes from having made impossible shots before. At 0500, as the sky began to lighten in the east, Thea settled into her first firing position. The desert held its breath. Thea's world narrowed to the circle of her scope. North Tower, 870 meters. The sniper was a bearded man in mismatched camouflage, cradling his rifle with the easy familiarity of a professional. He was scanning the southern approach, watching for the assault he expected to come from the direction of the American base. He never thought to look east, toward the impossible terrain that no sane commander would send a team through. Thea's breathing slowed. Her heartbeat settled into the rhythm she had practiced 10,000 times. She felt the wind, 2 knots from the northwest, steady and predictable. She made the calculations automatically, adjusting her aim for elevation, wind, and the barely perceptible curve of the earth. 1 shot. That was all she would get before every enemy in the compound knew she was here. 1 shot to begin the cascade that would either save Brennan or end with her body cooling in the desert sand. She thought of Elias one more time. She thought of the promise she had made over his grave. She thought of Commander Brennan's kindness in a place where kindness was a forgotten language. She exhaled slowly and let her finger rest against the trigger. The rifle bucked against her shoulder. 870 meters away, the first sniper collapsed without ever knowing death had found him. Thea worked the bolt and rolled left, coming to rest in her second firing position before the sound of the shot finished echoing across the desert. The second sniper was already turning toward his fallen comrade, confusion written across his face in the half-second before her round punched through his chest and dropped him where he stood. 2 down, 2 remaining. She moved again, flowing across the rocky terrain with the speed of desperation and the precision of training. Third position, 785 meters to the west outcropping. The young sniper was scrambling for cover behind a concrete barrier, his movements frantic as he tried to locate the source of the gunfire. Thea's third shot caught him mid-stride, spinning him sideways before he crumpled into a motionless heap. The fourth sniper was smarter. He had dropped below his parapet the moment the first shot rang out, and now he was invisible behind layers of sandbags and reinforced walls. Thea waited, her scope fixed on his position, her breathing steady despite the chaos erupting throughout the compound below. Shouts echoed through the night. Fighters poured from buildings, weapons raised, searching for a threat they couldn't locate. Someone was screaming orders, directing men toward defensive positions that would do nothing against a shooter they couldn't see. The fourth sniper made his mistake 30 seconds later. He rose just enough to scan the eastern approach through his own scope, trying to locate the ghost who had killed his comrades. Thea was waiting. Her fourth shot traveled 920 meters and found him before he could process what he was seeing. 4 enemy snipers eliminated in under 2 minutes. But something was wrong. The compound's response was too coordinated, too fast. They weren't panicking. They were executing a rehearsed response. The first counter sniper round cracked past her position before she finished moving, close enough that she felt the pressure wave against her cheek. Victor Constantine was smarter than she had anticipated. He had shooters she hadn't identified, professionals hidden in positions that hadn't been visible during her reconnaissance, held in reserve specifically for this contingency. Thea rolled into a shallow depression as two more rounds impacted where she had been lying. She counted muzzle flashes in the darkness. Three additional shooters, positioned in a triangle that covered her likely escape routes. They were good, very good, but she had faced better. 8 years earlier, a young Marine had walked into Scout Sniper School with nothing but determination and a promise made over her brother's grave. She had graduated at the top of her class, the first woman to complete the program in its history. Within 6 months, she had been recruited to a joint special operations unit that officially didn't exist. Master Chief Isaiah Grant had been her mentor, a legend among operators who had spent 30 years doing the work that kept nations safe. He had seen something in her that others missed, a combination of natural talent and absolute commitment that could be shaped into something extraordinary. He had trained her personally for 2 years, pushing her beyond every limit she thought she had. Long-range precision shooting, urban stalking, counter-sniper operations, close-quarters combat, survival, evasion, resistance, escape. Every discipline a special operator could master. She had learned at the feet of a man who had written the doctrine. By her third deployment, she had earned a call sign that was spoken in whispers among intelligence communities on 4 continents. Phantom, the ghost who killed without warning and vanished without trace. 127 confirmed kills across 6 deployments. Operations in Syria, Yemen, Afghanistan, Somalia, and places that would remain classified for decades. She had eliminated high-value targets that entire task forces had failed to reach. She had extracted prisoners from compounds that intelligence analysts called impenetrable. She had become exactly what Master Chief Grant believed she could be, a weapon unlike any other. Now that weapon lay in a shallow depression in the Arizona desert, pinned by 3 enemy countersnipers who were methodically trying to kill her. She smiled in the darkness. This was familiar territory. The countersnipers expected her to retreat, to seek cover and break contact. Instead, she did something they couldn't anticipate. She advanced. Moving in short bursts between moments of suppressive fire, she closed the distance to the nearest shooter while his attention was fixed on her last known position. She covered 200 meters in 5 minutes, using every fold of terrain, every shadow, every second of distraction. He never saw her coming. Her shot took him through the side of his skull at a range of 400 meters, closer than she had engaged any target tonight, but no less lethal for it. The second countersniper panicked. She heard him break position, abandoning his cover to seek better angles. It was a fatal mistake. He made it 6 steps before her round found him, entering through his chest and exiting through his back in a spray of blood and bone. The third was the best of them. He held his position, waiting for her to reveal herself, demonstrating the patience of a trained professional. They remained locked in silent standoff for nearly 5 minutes, each waiting for the other to make a fatal mistake. Thea refused to play his game. She circled wide, sacrificing time for position, until she had an angle he couldn't have anticipated. Her final shot ended the engagement with clinical precision. 7 enemy snipers eliminated. Victor Constantine's elevated overwatch was gone, his defenders stripped of their greatest advantage. Thea began moving toward the compound perimeter, her rifle exchanged for the suppressed pistol at her hip. The hard part was over. Now she had to bring Brennan home. The compound wall was 3 meters of stacked sandbags and concrete barriers, designed to stop vehicle-borne explosives and small arms fire. It was not designed to stop a single operator who had spent years learning to move through spaces that should have been impenetrable. Thea found her entry point on the eastern side, where a drainage culvert passed beneath the wall. The opening was barely wide enough for her shoulders, choked with debris and standing water that smelled of things she chose not to identify. She pulled herself through without hesitation, emerging inside the compound covered in filth but undetected. The chaos of her sniper assault still echoed through the compound. Fighters ran between buildings, shouting conflicting orders as they tried to establish a defensive perimeter against a threat they couldn't locate. None of them thought to look inward. None of them imagined that the ghost who had killed their snipers was already among them. She moved through shadows with the fluid grace of someone who had made darkness her native element. Two guards stood at the entrance to the central building, their attention fixed outward on the desert beyond the walls. Thea approached from behind, her footsteps silent on the packed earth. The first guard died with her blade across his throat, her hand clamped over his mouth to muffle any sound. The second turned at the soft noise of his partner falling, his eyes widening in the instant before her knife found the gap beneath his jaw. She lowered him gently, positioning both bodies to appear as though they had taken cover rather than died. The building's interior was a maze of narrow corridors and small rooms, lit by flickering bulbs that cast more shadows than illumination. Thea cleared each corner with methodical precision, her suppressed pistol raised and ready. She encountered 3 more fighters in the hallways. Each engagement lasted less than 2 seconds. A double tap to the chest, a controlled pair that dropped them before they could raise an alarm. The stairs to the second floor were guarded by a single man, who sat with his rifle across his knees, his head nodding with the weight of exhaustion. He never woke up. Thea's blade ensured his sleep became permanent. She found Brennan in the third room she checked. For a moment, even her trained composure wavered at the sight of him. They had beaten him badly. His face was swollen beyond easy recognition, his left eye completely closed, his lips split and crusted with dried blood. His hands were bound to a heavy chair with wire that had cut into his wrists, and his uniform hung in tatters that revealed bruises covering most of his torso. But he was alive. His chest rose and fell with labored breaths. His one good eye found her as she entered the room, and confusion flickered across his battered features. "The logistics analyst," he rasped through broken lips. "What are you doing here?" Thea crossed to him and began cutting the wire from his wrists with quick, efficient movements. "Getting you out, Commander. Can you walk?" "I can try." He winced as circulation returned to his hands, his fingers flexing with the pain of renewed blood flow. "How did you get in here? Where's the assault team?" "There is no assault team." She helped him to his feet, steadying him as his legs threatened to buckle beneath him. "It's just me." Brennan stared at her with his one functional eye, and she watched understanding begin to dawn through the fog of pain and exhaustion. "Just you. You took out the snipers. You infiltrated a compound with 30-plus hostiles. Alone." "We can discuss my resume later, Commander." Thea handed him a pistol taken from one of the guards and positioned herself at the door, checking the corridor. "Right now we need to move." He was weak, unsteady, probably suffering from a concussion and several cracked ribs at minimum. Moving through hostile territory with a wounded man was exponentially more dangerous than moving alone, but she hadn't come this far to leave him behind. They made it to the ground floor before everything went wrong. A fighter emerged from a side room without warning, his rifle coming up as he shouted an alarm. Thea put 2 rounds in his chest before he finished the first word, but the damage was done. His shout echoed through the building, answered by running footsteps and barked commands. "Contact," Thea said calmly, her voice carrying none of the adrenaline that must have been flooding her system. "Stay behind me, Commander." The next 2 minutes were a controlled hurricane of violence. Fighters poured into the corridor from both directions, and Thea met them with the cold precision of a machine designed for exactly this purpose. Her pistol barked in measured cadence, each shot finding its target, each movement flowing into the next with fluid efficiency that spoke of 10,000 hours of training. Brennan watched her work with the stunned expression of a man witnessing something he had never imagined possible. He had spent 15 years in special operations, had trained with the best operators in the world, had seen combat in every theater the modern military had touched. He had never seen anything like this. Thea moved through the enemy fighters like water through stone, impossible to grasp, devastating in her passage. When her pistol ran dry, she transitioned to a rifle taken from a fallen enemy without breaking stride. When 2 fighters rushed her simultaneously, she put them down with a combination of gunfire and hand-to-hand techniques that left both men crumpled on the floor before Brennan could process what had happened. They reached the building's rear exit with a trail of bodies in their wake. The compound beyond was in full alarm now, fighters converging on the central building from all directions. Thea assessed the tactical situation in a heartbeat. They couldn't go back the way she had come, too exposed, too many hostiles between them and the perimeter. "We need another route," she said. Brennan leaned against the doorframe, his breathing labored. "Motor pool, southwest corner. If we can reach a vehicle, we can punch through the main gate." Thea nodded. The motor pool was 50 meters away across open ground that offered no cover and no mercy. She counted at least a dozen fighters between their position and the vehicles, with more converging from the northern buildings every second. But there was no other option. She pulled Brennan close and spoke directly into his ear. Fast and violent. Stay on my six. If I go down, you take the nearest vehicle and drive. Don't stop. Don't look back. Understood? I'm not leaving you behind. Thea met his eyes. Even beaten and broken, Commander Jacob Brennan had steel in his gaze. Then don't slow me down. She kicked open the door and moved. 50 meters of open ground stretched before them like an execution gauntlet. Thea burst through the door with Brennan stumbling behind her, his hand gripping her tactical vest as they moved into the killing zone. The compound's floodlights painted everything in harsh white, eliminating shadows and exposing them to every gun in the complex. Fighters materialized from doorways and around corners, weapons rising, mouths opening to shout warnings and orders. Thea fired as she ran. Her stolen rifle cracked in controlled bursts, dropping the nearest threats with mechanical precision. A fighter to her left took 2 rounds to the chest and folded. Another ahead raised his weapon and died with a hole through his throat. She felt Brennan's weight against her back, heard his labored breathing, knew he was running on adrenaline and willpower alone. 20 meters to the motor pool. Gunfire erupted from multiple positions. Rounds snapped past her head, kicked up dust at her feet, impacted the concrete wall beside them with sharp cracks that sent fragments of stone spinning through the air. Thea felt something tug at her sleeve, a near miss that would have taken her arm if she'd been a fraction slower. She dropped to one knee and fired 3 rapid shots at a fighter emerging from behind a vehicle. He went down hard. She rose and pushed forward, half dragging Brennan now as his strength began to fail. 10 meters. A burst of automatic fire stitched across the ground in front of them. Thea changed direction without slowing, angling toward a stack of supply crates that offered momentary cover. They crashed behind it together, Brennan gasping for air, his face gray with pain and exhaustion. "I can't," he started. "Yes, you can." Thea's voice cut through his despair like a blade. She ejected her empty magazine and slammed in a fresh one. "We're almost there, Commander. You don't get to quit on me now." She rose and fired over the crates, forcing back 2 fighters who had been advancing on their position. Behind them, she could hear more men shouting, coordinating, moving to cut off their escape. The window of opportunity was closing fast. That's when she saw it. The generator housing sat 30 meters to the north, a diesel unit that powered the compound's lights and security systems. Beyond it, clearly visible in the floodlights, stood 3 massive fuel storage tanks. Master Chief Grant's voice echoed in her memory. "When you're outnumbered and outgunned, turn the enemy's resources into weapons." Thea made her decision in less than a second. "Commander, see that truck?" She pointed to a battered technical parked at the edge of the motor pool, its engine facing their direction. "When the lights go out, you run for it. Don't stop, don't look back. I'll be right behind you." Brennan followed her gaze, and understanding dawned. "What are you going to do?" Something irrational. Before he could protest, she was moving. Thea sprinted toward the generator housing, staying low, using every scrap of cover the compound offered. Rounds followed her progress, chewing up ground and concrete, but she was moving too fast and too unpredictably for effective fire. She reached the generator and dropped behind it, immediately pulling out her knife and attacking the fuel line. Diesel began pooling on the ground beneath the housing. She disabled the emergency shutoff with quick cuts, ensuring the fuel would continue flowing even after the explosion. Then she turned her attention to the storage tanks. 2 guards stood near the tanks, their attention fixed on the chaos by the central building. They died without seeing her coming. 2 shots, 2 bodies, no hesitation. Thea positioned herself 50 meters from the tanks and raised her rifle. The guards near the motor pool were still focused on Brennan's position, still waiting for him to break cover. None of them were watching the eastern section of the compound. None of them saw the female operator taking aim at their fuel supply. Thea fired. The round sparked off the metal tank housing. She fired again and again, each impact throwing sparks into the diesel-soaked air around the generator. On her 5th shot, the generator caught. The explosion was spectacular. Orange fire bloomed from the eastern section of the compound, a violent eruption that ripped through the generator housing and sent shrapnel spinning through the air. The shockwave hit Thea even at 50 meters, a physical force that she felt in her chest. A heartbeat later, the fuel tanks followed. The first tank detonated with a roar that shook the ground beneath her feet. The second and third followed in rapid succession, a cascading series of explosions that turned the night into day and sent a mushroom cloud of fire and smoke rising into the pre-dawn sky. The compound's lights died instantly, plunging everything into a flickering hell of flame and shadow. Thea was already running. She sprinted through the chaos, through the smoke and the screaming, through the confusion of fighters diving for cover in every direction. She ran toward the motor pool where Brennan was supposed to be waiting, praying he had made it to the vehicle, praying he hadn't been hit in the crossfire. She found him behind the wheel of the technical, the engine already running, his battered face illuminated by the hellfire she had unleashed. He had found a rifle somewhere and held it awkwardly in his hands, covering the approaches. "Get in!" he shouted over the roar of the flames. Thea vaulted into the passenger seat as he slammed the accelerator. The technical lurched forward, tires spinning on loose gravel before finding traction. Fighters emerged from the smoke ahead of them, rifles raised, and Thea leaned out the window to engage. The main gate was 50 meters ahead, 40, 30. A burst of gunfire stitched across the hood, shattering the windshield and filling the cab with flying glass. Brennan hunched lower but kept his foot on the accelerator, driving blind through the chaos. Thea fired back, dropping two fighters who had moved to block the gate. 20 meters. 10. They hit the gate at 60 kilometers per hour. Metal screamed and tore. For a terrible moment, Thea thought they would stop, caught in the wreckage of the barrier, trapped and helpless as the enemy regrouped. Then they were through, the desert opening before them as the burning compound fell away behind. Brennan kept driving, his knuckles white on the steering wheel, his breath coming in ragged gasps that spoke of broken ribs and punctured lung. Thea turned to watch the flames receding in the distance, the ammunition stores beginning to cook off in secondary explosions that painted the sky in shades of red and orange. They had made it out. Against all odds, against all rational assessment, they had made it out alive. But the compound was 5 kilometers behind them now, and FOB Sentinel was still 7 kilometers ahead. The Technical's engine was making ominous noises, steam beginning to hiss from beneath the shattered hood where enemy rounds had torn through critical components. They were not safe yet. The engine died 3 kilometers from base. It coughed once, twice, then fell silent with a wheeze of failing machinery. Steam poured from beneath the hood in a white cloud. Brennan tried the ignition twice before accepting what they both already knew. "We walk from here," Thea said. Brennan nodded grimly and pushed open his door. The movement caused him to gasp, his face contorting with pain as damaged ribs shifted beneath his skin. He was getting worse. The adrenaline that had sustained him through the escape was fading, leaving behind the full weight of his injuries. Thea moved to support him, slinging his arm over her shoulders and taking as much of his weight as she could manage. Together, they stumbled into the desert, leaving the useless vehicle behind. The terrain was brutal. Loose sand and jagged rocks conspired to turn every step into an ordeal. Brennan's breathing grew more labored with each passing minute, the wet rattle in his lungs becoming more pronounced. He needed surgery, needed a trauma team, needed things that were still kilometers away across hostile ground. Behind them, headlights appeared on the horizon. "How many?" Brennan gasped. Thea glanced back, counting the lights against the pre-dawn sky. 4 vehicles, maybe 5, probably 20 fighters or more, and they were closing fast. She scanned the terrain ahead and found what she was looking for, a rocky outcropping that rose from the desert floor 500 meters to the north, a natural defensive position that would provide cover and sight lines. "There," she said, adjusting their course. "We make our stand there." Brennan's voice was weak, but his meaning was clear. "You mean you make your stand. You're going to put me somewhere safe and then fight them alone." Thea didn't deny it. They reached the outcropping as the enemy vehicles drew within a kilometer. Thea positioned Brennan in a shallow depression between 2 boulders, pressing a rifle into his hands along with her remaining magazines. "Stay down," she said. "Don't engage unless they get past me." His hand caught her wrist, his grip surprisingly strong despite everything. "Who are you really?" Thea looked down at him, this man who had shown her kindness when no one else would, who had refused to leave her behind even when logic demanded it. She pulled her brother's dog tags from beneath her shirt and let him see them. "My name is Thea Brandt," she said quietly. Call sign Phantom, and I'm going to get you home. She pulled free before he could respond and moved to her position at the top of the outcropping, settling behind a cluster of rocks that provided both cover and clear sight lines to the approaching enemy. The vehicles had stopped 400 meters out, disgorging fighters who spread into assault formation. They were professionals, moving with coordinated precision, using the terrain to cover their approach. Thea counted 23 men, all armed, all dangerous. But they were approaching a position held by the most lethal sniper their world had ever produced. She settled behind her rifle and let her breathing slow, falling into the familiar rhythm that had carried her through 127 confirmed kills. The first fighter entered her crosshairs at 350 meters, his silhouette backlit by the headlights of his vehicle. She fired. The battle that followed would later be described in classified after-action reports as one of the most remarkable defensive engagements in special operations history. A single operator, armed with a stolen rifle and limited ammunition, held off a force of 23 enemy fighters for nearly 40 minutes. Thea fired with mechanical precision, each shot finding its mark, each kill buying another few seconds of time. When the fighters tried to flank her position, she anticipated their movement and cut them down in the open ground. When they attempted to use their vehicles as cover, she disabled the engines and turned the machines into death traps. The enemy commander, she could tell by the way he moved, the way others looked to him for orders, was a veteran. He had fought Americans before and learned to respect their capabilities. But he had never faced anything like this. His fighters were dying in ones and twos, picked off by a ghost they couldn't see and couldn't suppress. Fear began to spread through his ranks. After 20 minutes, 8 of his fighters were down. After 30 minutes, 14. He made the decision to lead the final assault personally, driving his remaining men forward through sheer force of will, accepting losses to close the distance. Thea's ammunition was running low. She had perhaps 10 rounds remaining when the first fighters reached the base of the outcropping. She shifted to her pistol and met them as they climbed. The close quarters fighting was savage and brief. 2 fighters died on the rocks before they reached her position, caught in the open with nowhere to hide. A third made it over the lip and grappled with her in the darkness, his superior size and strength meaningless against her training and speed. She broke his arm and then his neck in 2 fluid motions. Movements she had practiced 10,000 times until they became muscle memory. But the 4th fighter caught her from behind, his arms wrapping around her torso and pinning her weapon against her chest. She twisted and struck, but more hands grabbed her, dragging her down. 5 men, then 6, overwhelming her through sheer numbers and weight. The enemy commander stood over her as his surviving men held her immobile. Blood ran from a wound on his scalp where one of her rounds had grazed him, and his eyes burned with fury and grudging respect. "Phantom," he said in accented English. "Finally, I've waited 2 years for this." Thea spat blood and met his gaze. Even pinned and helpless, she showed no fear. Should have waited longer. He raised his pistol and aimed at her head. "For Chechnya, for Syria, for my brothers you killed." The shot came from behind him. The commander staggered, confusion crossing his face as he looked down at the spreading red stain on his chest. He turned slowly toward the source of the gunfire. Commander Jacob Brennan stood 10 meters away, braced against a boulder, the rifle shaking in his hands, his battered face set with grim determination. He had disobeyed her order to stay down. He had climbed from his protected position despite broken ribs and a punctured lung. He had taken the shot that saved her life. He fired again, and Viktor Konstantin, the Spetsnaz veteran, the mercenary, the man who had survived Chechnya and Syria and a dozen other wars, fell. The remaining 3 fighters froze, their leader dead, their numbers decimated, their will finally broken. Thea used their hesitation to tear free from the hands holding her. She retrieved her pistol in one smooth motion and put 3 rounds into 3 targets in the span of 4 seconds. Silence fell over the outcropping, broken only by the distant sound of helicopter rotors and the ragged sound of Brennan's breathing. Thea crossed to him as his legs gave out, catching him before he hit the ground. He looked up at her with his one good eye and managed something that might have been a smile. "Told you," he whispered. "Not leaving you behind." In the distance, the Black Hawk appeared against the lightning sky, running lights blazing, coming fast. Someone at FOB Sentinel had been monitoring their radio frequencies. Someone had heard the firefight. Someone had sent help. The helicopter touched down in a storm of dust and rotor wash, its side door already open before the skids hit the ground. Master Gunnery Sergeant Sterling Cade was the first one out, his rifle sweeping the perimeter before his eyes found Thea kneeling beside Brennan's prone form. He froze for a half second, taking in the scene, the bodies scattered across the outcropping, the shell casings glinting in the helicopter's lights, the woman he had helped, and the commander she had saved. Then training took over, and he was moving, shouting for the medic, helping to lift Brennan onto the stretcher that two other Marines had rushed forward. "What happened here?" Petty Officer Webb asked as they worked, his young face pale with shock. Thea rose to her feet, swaying slightly as exhaustion began to claim its due. "Later, get him to medical, now." The flight back to FOB Sentinel took 11 minutes. Thea sat beside Brennan's stretcher, her hand resting on his arm as the medic worked to stabilize him. His eye fluttered open once during the flight, finding her face in the red glow of the cabin lights. "Still here," he murmured. "Still here," she confirmed. He smiled faintly and let unconsciousness take him again. Forward Operating Base Sentinel was in controlled chaos when they landed. Word had spread that the commander had been recovered, and personnel lined the path from the landing pad to the medical station. Thea walked beside the stretcher until they reached the surgical suite, where a team of trauma specialists took over with practiced efficiency. She stood outside the door for a long moment, watching through the window as they cut away Brennan's ruined uniform and began assessing the full extent of his injuries. Cracked ribs, punctured lung, severe contusions, possible internal bleeding. The list was long, but the prognosis was survival. He would live. She had kept her promise. "Chief Warrant Officer Brandt." Captain Vance's voice pulled her from her vigil. She turned to find him standing in the corridor with half a dozen other officers, all of them staring at her with expressions ranging from shock to something that looked almost like awe. "Captain Vance wants to see you in the operations center," Webb said quietly, appearing at her elbow. "All senior staff are assembling." Thea nodded and followed, leaving bloody footprints on the clean floor. She was aware of how she must look, covered in dirt and blood, her uniform torn, her face bruised and scratched. She was aware of the silence that followed her through the base, the way people stopped what they were doing to watch her pass. She was aware that her cover was blown, that the Ghost Unit operative who had spent 6 deployments operating in the shadows was about to step into the light. The operations center fell silent when she entered. Every eye turned toward her, tracking the blood on her clothes, the exhaustion in her movements, the way she carried herself like someone who had pushed far past normal human limits and found reserves they didn't know existed. Captain Vance stood at the tactical display, his face unreadable. Around him, the SEALs who had witnessed his failed rescue attempt watched with expressions ranging from confusion to dawning understanding. Master Gunnery Sergeant Cade stood near the back, his weathered face showing the first hint of a smile. "Close the door," Vance said quietly. Webb complied, and the soft click of the latch seemed unnaturally loud in the silence. Vance stared at Thea for a long moment. "I just got off the line with JSOC. They received Commander Brennan's preliminary debrief from the helicopter." He paused, and something in his expression shifted. Pride warring with shame. Respect battling with ego. "He told them what you did." Thea said nothing. There was nothing to say. "He told them you infiltrated a hostile compound alone," Vance continued, his voice flat and mechanical, as if he was reciting facts he couldn't quite process. "That you eliminated 7 enemy snipers, including a counter-sniper team. That you extracted him under fire and then held off a pursuit force of 23 hostiles until rescue arrived." Another pause. "He said you killed 17 enemy combatants in one night, more than most operators see in an entire deployment." Still, Thea remained silent. Vance took a step toward her. "I asked JSOC who you really are. They told me your file is classified above my clearance level, above the clearance level of anyone at this base." He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper. "Then they told me one thing. Your call sign." The word hung in the air between them, heavy with implications. Phantom. A murmur rippled through the assembled personnel. The call sign was not unknown to them. It existed in the shadows of special operations, a whispered legend that most believed was myth or exaggeration. A ghost who eliminated targets that couldn't be reached. A phantom who extracted prisoners from places that couldn't be breached. Vance's jaw tightened. I owe you an apology. You owe Commander Brennan gratitude that he's alive, Thea replied evenly. You don't owe me anything. I treated you like a liability. I dismissed your expertise. I ignored your warnings. Vance's voice cracked slightly on the last word. If I had listened to you, my men wouldn't have been wounded. The commander might have been recovered days ago. Thea studied him, seeing past the pride and the shame to the man beneath. He wasn't evil. He wasn't even incompetent. He was simply a man who had allowed his assumptions to blind him to reality. You made decisions based on the information you had, she said. The failure wasn't in your tactics. It was in your refusal to accept information that contradicted your expectations. Vance absorbed this in silence. Then he did something that clearly cost him. He extended his hand. Thank you, he said, for saving our commander, for proving me wrong. Thea looked at his hand for a moment, then reached out and shook it. The room seemed to exhale collectively, tension dissolving into something that felt almost like acceptance. Webb stepped forward, his young face shining with barely contained emotion. What happens now? Now, I wait for Commander Brennan to recover, Thea said. She glanced around the room at the faces watching her. What I did here was never supposed to be witnessed. My cover is compromised. I can't return to logistics work. Where will you go? Someone asked. Thea allowed herself a small smile. Wherever they need a ghost. She turned and walked out of the operations center, leaving behind a room full of operators who would spend the rest of their careers telling stories about the night a logistics analyst turned out to be the deadliest sniper they had ever seen. 3 days passed before Brennan was strong enough for visitors beyond medical staff. Thea came each morning and evening, sitting beside his bed while he drifted in and out of consciousness. She didn't speak much during these visits. Her presence was enough, a silent reminder that he hadn't been forgotten, that someone had cared enough to walk into hell to bring him home. On the 4th day, he was awake and lucid when she arrived. Someone had helped him shave, and though his face was still swollen and discolored, he looked more like the commander she had first met in the mess hall. They want to give you a medal, he said as she settled into the chair beside his bed. They can't. Officially, I was never here. Brennan smiled faintly. Officially, a lot of things never happened. That's never stopped the people who matter from knowing the truth. Thea looked down at her hands, uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. I didn't do it for recognition. I know, he shifted slightly, wincing as his ribs protested. You did it because I was decent to you. That's what you told Intelligence Officer Merrick. She looked up sharply. Brennan's smile widened slightly. I've been conducting my own debriefs. Paige told me about your conversation, about why you decided to act when no one would have blamed you for staying in your cover role. Thea was silent for a long moment. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft. My brother was killed in an operation that never existed. No one came for him. No one even tried. She met Brennan's eyes. I swore I would never let that happen to someone else. Not if I could prevent it. Your brother was lucky to have you. He never knew what I became. He died before I finished training. She paused. Sometimes I wonder what he would think if he could see me now. Brennan reached out and took her hand, his grip warm despite the IV lines trailing from his arm. I think he would be proud. Not because of what you can do, but because of why you do it. The words struck something deep inside her, a place she had armored so thoroughly that she had forgotten it existed. She felt tears prick at her eyes and blinked them back with the discipline of long practice. Thank you, she said quietly. That afternoon, Brennan called a meeting. Every able-bodied member of his command gathered in the operations center, including the men still recovering from wounds sustained in Vance's failed rescue attempt. Thea stood at the back of the room, uncertain why she had been summoned. Brennan entered, supported by 2 medics, waving off their assistants as he made his way to the front of the room. His movements were slow and careful, but his voice was strong when he spoke. 4 days ago, I was a prisoner, he began. I had been beaten, interrogated, and scheduled for execution. By all reasonable assessment, I should be dead. He paused, letting the words settle over his men. I am not dead because of the actions of one person. A person most of you dismissed, ignored, or actively hindered. Thea felt the weight of every eye in the room turning toward her. Brennan continued. I have requested and received authorization to read relevant portions of Chief Warrant Officer Thea Brandt's service record into this briefing. What I'm about to tell you is classified, and you will not repeat it outside this room. He lifted a tablet and began to read. Chief Warrant Officer Thea Brandt, former Marine Scout Sniper, first woman to complete the program in its history. Recruited to Joint Special Operations Command for assignment to units that do not officially exist. Call sign, Phantom. The room was utterly silent. 127 confirmed kills across 6 deployments, Brennan continued. Operations conducted in Syria, Yemen, Afghanistan, Somalia, and locations that remain classified. Credited with the elimination of 14 high-value targets that conventional forces failed to reach. Successfully extracted 11 prisoners from hostile custody prior to this operation. He lowered the tablet and looked around the room. She infiltrated a compound held by over 30 enemy fighters. She eliminated 7 snipers, including a trained counter-sniper team. She extracted me under fire and then held off a pursuit force of 23 hostiles until rescue arrived, killing 17 of them in the process. Brennan turned to face Thea directly. Chief Warrant Officer Brandt is the most capable operator I have encountered in 15 years of special operations. She accomplished alone what our entire team could not. And she did it after being treated with disrespect and dismissal by people who should have known better. Vance stood near the front of the room, his face tight with emotion. He stepped forward and turned to address the assembled men. I was one of those people, he said, his voice carrying the weight of genuine shame. I looked at her and saw a liability instead of an asset. I ignored her expertise because it didn't fit my expectations. My failure nearly cost Commander Brennan his life, and it put our entire team at risk. He turned to Thea. I was wrong. We were wrong. One by one, the other SEALs followed his lead. Some simply nodded in acknowledgement. Others spoke brief words of respect or gratitude. Webb crossed the room to stand beside her, his young face shining with emotion. I knew there was something about you, he said quietly. From the moment I saw you help that injured specialist, I just didn't know what. Thea looked around the room at these men who had doubted her, dismissed her, and ultimately witnessed the truth of who she was. She had spent years operating in shadows, her accomplishments known only to a handful of people with sufficient clearance. She had never sought recognition, never wanted it. But standing here, surrounded by warriors who now understood what she was, she felt something she hadn't experienced since the day she learned of her brother's death. She felt like she belonged. Thank you, she said, her voice carrying clearly through the silent room. All of you. Brennan smiled from his position at the front of the room. No, Chief Warrant Officer Brandt, thank you. 1 week after the rescue, Thea received her transfer orders. A new assignment in a location she could not name, pursuing objectives she could not discuss. The life of a ghost continued even when the ghost had been seen. She spent her final morning at Forward Operating Base Sentinel, saying goodbyes she had never expected to make. Vance found her outside the armory where she was returning equipment. He stood awkwardly for a moment, a man unaccustomed to humility, struggling to find words. I've been doing this for 18 years, he finally said. I thought I knew what operators looked like, what they sounded like, how they carried themselves. He shook his head. You broke every assumption I had, and I'm grateful for it. Thea studied him. Learn from it. The next person you dismiss might be the one who saves your life, or fails to save it because you pushed them away. Vance extended his hand. If you ever need anything, Chief Warrant Officer, anything at all, you know where to find us. She shook his hand, feeling the calluses of a career warrior against her palm. Take care of your men, Captain. They deserve a leader who sees them clearly. He nodded once and walked away, his shoulders carrying a weight that looked different than before. Not lighter, perhaps, but more honestly borne. Webb was waiting for her near the helicopter pad, his young face struggling to contain emotions he hadn't yet learned to hide. I put in a request for sniper training, he said. The selection board meets next month. Thea allowed herself a small smile. You'll do well. Because you think I have talent? Because you have something more important than talent. She placed a hand on his shoulder. You have the ability to see people for who they really are, not who you expect them to be. That will take you further than any skill with a rifle. Webb's eyes glistened, but he held her gaze. Will I ever see you again? Probably not. But if you ever hear whispers about a ghost doing impossible things in impossible places, you'll know. He surprised her then, stepping forward and embracing her briefly. Thank you, he said quietly, for everything. She returned the embrace for just a moment before stepping back. Thank you for being the first one to see me. Paige Merrick approached as Webb walked away, her intelligence officer credentials displayed prominently on her uniform. Your transport is inbound, 15 minutes. Thea nodded. Thank you for your help. The armory access, the intelligence updates. I couldn't have done it without you. Paige smiled slightly. I just left a few doors open. You're the one who walked through them. She paused. The intelligence community is going to be talking about this operation for years. The Night Phantom came out of the shadows. The shadows are where I belong. Maybe, Paige tilted her head, but now people know those shadows have teeth. The sound of an approaching helicopter drew their attention. Thea turned to see Brennan making his way across the compound, moving slowly but under his own power. The medics had cleared him for light duty that morning, though full recovery would take months. He stopped in front of her, and for a moment neither of them spoke. I'm not good at goodbyes, he said finally. Neither am I. He reached into his pocket and withdrew something small. When he opened his hand, Thea saw a worn challenge coin, its surface scratched and faded from years of being carried. This was given to me by my first commanding officer, Brennan said. He told me to pass it on when I found someone who embodied everything special operations should be. He pressed the coin into her palm. I've been carrying it for 15 years, waiting to find that person. Thea looked down at the coin, feeling its weight, understanding its meaning. Commander, I can't accept this. You already have. He closed her fingers around it. You saved my life. Not just my body, but something else. He touched his chest. You reminded me why we do this. Why the sacrifices matter. Why the shadows need people like you standing in them. She felt tears threatening again and didn't fight them this time. One slipped down her cheek, cutting a track through the dust that seemed permanently embedded in her skin. I'll carry it with honor, she said. I know you will. The helicopter touched down behind them, its rotors filling the air with thunder and wind. Thea turned toward it, then paused and looked back. Brennan stood with Webb and Vance flanking him, Paige slightly behind. Beyond them, she could see other members of the team gathering to watch her departure. Men who had dismissed her, doubted her, and ultimately witnessed the truth of who she was. She raised her hand in a simple wave, and they responded in kind. Then she climbed into the helicopter and let it carry her away. As the base shrank beneath her, Thea withdrew the photograph of her brother from her pocket. She held it beside Brennan's challenge coin, the two objects representing everything she had lost and everything she had found. I kept my promise, Elias, she whispered. I didn't let him die in the shadows. The helicopter banked toward the horizon, toward a new mission in a new place where new enemies waited. She didn't know what challenges lay ahead. Only that she would face them the same way she had faced everything since the day her brother died, with skill, with determination, with the quiet certainty that some promises were worth any price. Below her, the desert stretched endless and indifferent, keeping its secrets as it always had. But somewhere in that vastness, in a compound still smoldering from her passage, stories were already being told. Whispered accounts of a woman who had done the impossible, who had walked into hell alone and walked out with a commander on her arm. The legend of Phantom had been a rumor before. Now it was something more. Now it was a warning. 6 months later, Scout Sniper School, Marine Corps Base Quantico, Virginia. Chief Warrant Officer Thea Brandt stood before a class of 30 young Marines, her arm fully healed from the shrapnel wound she'd taken during the extraction. The students watched her with a mixture of curiosity and respect. Word had spread about the instructor with the classified service record and the call sign that was spoken only in whispers. This is an MK-22 sniper rifle, she began, holding up the weapon. Same rifle I used in the Arizona operation. Same rifle my brother used in Somalia. Same rifle Master Gunnery Sergeant Cade used in the Gulf War. She paused, letting her gaze sweep across the class. Technology advances. This rifle remains. Do you know why? Silence. The students waited for the answer. Because fundamentals never change. Wind reading, range estimation, breathing control, trigger discipline. These skills don't require computers or satellites. They require dedication, practice, and the willingness to perfect your craft through 10,000 repetitions. She spent the next hour teaching them to read wind using mirage and vegetation movement, to estimate range using the mil-dot formula, to control their breathing in ways that would become second nature after enough practice. She taught them the lessons Master Chief Grant had taught her, the wisdom that Master Gunnery Sergeant Cade had shared, the hard-won knowledge that came from 127 confirmed kills across 6 deployments. After class, a young female private approached her. She was 19, blonde, nervous. Ma'am, I heard stories about the Arizona operation. Is it true you made shots at over 1,000 meters? Yes. How? I can barely hit targets at 600. Thea studied the young woman, seeing in her the same determination she had felt at that age, the same hunger to prove herself in a world that doubted her capability. What's your name? Private Keller, ma'am. Private Keller, I'm going to tell you what Master Gunnery Sergeant Cade taught me. Thea placed a hand on the young woman's shoulder. You don't make the shot because you know you can. You make it because someone's life depends on you trying. Technology helps, but belief in yourself wins. Private Keller's eyes lit up with understanding. Thank you, ma'am. Don't thank me. Thank the warriors who came before. Your job is to be better than me. Then teach the next one to be better than you. That's how we honor them. That evening, Thea sat alone in her quarters, the challenge coin Brennan had given her resting on her desk beside the photograph of Elias. She had received a letter that morning, a brief note from Commander Brennan, now recovered and back to full duty, leading a new team on a new mission in a location he couldn't name. You taught me something, Phantom, he had written. You taught me that the measure of a warrior isn't in the weapons they carry or the technology they employ. It's in the promises they keep and the people they refuse to abandon. Thank you for keeping your promise. Thank you for not abandoning me. Thea touched the photograph of her brother, then the challenge coin, then the letter. 3 objects, 3 reminders of why she did what she did. The promises we make in the shadows matter more than the ones we make in the light. Because the shadows are where the real work happens, where the impossible becomes possible, where ghosts become legends. And Thea Brandt, call sign Phantom, 127 confirmed kills, 12 successful extractions, 6 deployments across 4 continents, was still out there, still keeping promises, still walking into the shadows so that others could walk in the light. Some missions end. The warrior spirit never does. It just waits for the next promise that needs keeping.